Welcome to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel with your top headlines from across the region. It's 7 a.m. in New York City. It's 2 p.m. here in Israel. I'm Khalid Ben David, and here are the latest developments coming to you. The U.S. has submitted a draft resolution to the UN Security Council that would grant it and other countries taking part in an international stabilization force the authority to govern Gaza and maintain security control over it for at least 2 years. Now, if approved by the Security Council, the resolution would mark the most significant international intervention in Gaza since the outbreak of the war, combining reconstruction, governance, reform, and security enforcement under joint Arab and Western oversight. Now, the Axios news site published a copy of the resolution, which calls for the stabilization force to be created together with a board of peace chaired by President Trump that would oversee its activities. Now, the plan aims to begin deploying the first troops of the ISF into Gaza by January 2027. Humanitarian aid would 2026, Humanitarian aid would resume under the Board of Peace's oversight and in cooperation with the UN, the Red Cross, and Red Crescent, with strict measures to prevent diversion by armed groups. The resolution says the ISF's mission would be to, quote, stabilize the security environment in Gaza by ensuring the process of demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, including the destruction and prevention of rebuilding of military terror and offensive infrastructure, as well as the permanent decommissioning of weapons from non-state armed groups. Now, the ISF would also begin training a Palestinian police force and utilize apolitical Palestinian technocrats in the administration of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority would have no role in Gaza until it completed, quote, a process of reform acceptable to the Board of Peace. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said repeatedly the PA can have no role in the future governance of Gaza. The Times of Israel cited a diplomatic source as saying the U.S. hopes to have the Gaza resolution approved by the Security Council before the visit to Washington by Saudi Arabia's Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which is set for November 18. Meanwhile, a dispute over the fate of some 200 Hamas terrorists still in the area of the Gaza Strip controlled by the IDF is highlighting the challenges faced by Israel under the ceasefire agreement. The Hamas fighters are reportedly hiding in tunnels under Rafah in southern Gaza on the Israeli side of the so-called Yellow Line. According to reports in Israeli media, the Trump administration is pressuring Prime Minister Netanyahu to allow them to cross over the Yellow Line into territory that's still controlled by Hamas, seeing this as a needed step to advance into the next stages of the Gaza deal. The hardliners in Netanyahu's cabinet reacted strongly to the report, with Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich calling it, quote, utter madness, and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir saying all Hamas terrorists must be destroyed rather than be released under ridiculous conditions. Now, according to other reports in Israeli media, the Trump administration is pressuring Prime Minister Netanyahu to allow them to cross over the Yellow Line into that territory, seeing it as a step needed. The Prime Minister's office clarified in its statement that it will not allow any of the 200 to cross over unless they first give up their weapons in line with the agreement's conditions of disarming Hamas. The IDF reportedly not oppose a decision by the government to allow safe passage for Hamas terrorists, saying these are political considerations involved in terms of Israel's relationship with the U.S. And moving to the northern front now, last night an IDF airstrike succeeded in eliminating Mohammed Ali Hadid, a commander in Hezbollah's Radwan force, this in the Nabatea area of southern Lebanon. The IDF said Hadid had helped plan and carry out numerous terror attacks against Israel and recently worked to re-establish Hamas terror infrastructure in South Lebanon. And another IDF strike in South Lebanon eliminated another Hezbollah terrorist attempting to gather intelligence on IDF troops. Now, the IDF has stepped up its operations against Hezbollah in recent weeks, saying the terrorist activities constitute a violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon. According to security sources, Hezbollah, with Iran's help, is trying to rebuild and retrench itself in Lebanon. The U.S. Special Envoy for Lebanon, Tom Barak, earlier this week called on the Lebanese government to fulfill its obligations under the ceasefire agreement reached last November to disarm Hezbollah and prevent its infiltration back into southern Lebanon. Well, joining us now for more on these issues is Sarit Zehavi. She's president of the Alma Research Center. and an IDF Reserves Brigadier General Yosef Kuperwasser. He's the former head of research at IDF Intelligence. Thank you for joining us. We'll look at these issues separately, then maybe bring them together. Yossi, I'll start with you. This report out of Gaza about these 200 Hamas terrorists who are still apparently on the Israeli side of the yellow line and their fate. I just want to get your comment on that and how it seems to highlight the way. I mean, certainly these were issues that should have been decided or thought about before there was this rush to redeploy IDF forces in Gaza.
Well, thank you for having me. And I'm the head of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security.
Yes, also that.
Amongst other things. Yes, regarding those 200 Hamas terrorists that are caught in the Rafah area, the problem is more complicated than one could have envisaged. The problem is that probably they were involved in breaching the ceasefire by carrying out several terror attacks from within the yellow line, in which three Israeli soldiers were killed. And that makes the situation even more complicated, because we can't just let people who were involved in breaching the same ceasefire they want to rely upon in order to get free passage to go free. And that's why I think that there's a tension here. If it were not so complicated, maybe we could have gone in this direction. But now that we know that these are the people that were involved in a terror attack that was carried out after the ceasefire, it really sounds very ridiculous to let them go. And I think that what we need to see is that if they are going to be released, this should be part of a wider deal that would guarantee that Hamas brings back all the hostages bodies that were left in his area of control, and that Hamas is saying that they are ready to disarm, because what we are asking these people is to disarm. They are going to disarm probably in the context of a general disarmament of move by Hamas. And so if those two demands are going to be met, then we can let them go. If not, we should arrest them and keep them on our side.
All right. And now I do want to now turn to the northern front, Sarit. And again, we are seeing the IDF taking this action in southern Lebanon. Again, we have seen, as I mentioned before, the U.S. Special Envoy calling on the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army to take action. But as time goes on, this is just simply looking increasingly unlikely. I mean, at what point does Israel basically have to say, at this point, we just have to reassert ourselves, possibly even going into more offensive operations, certainly in South Lebanon?
Well, first, thank you for having me. I want to put some proportions here. When we analyze the statistics, we don't see an escalation in the Israeli attacks in Lebanon during the ceasefire. If it's been a few dozens of attacks each month, it is pretty stable in almost the past year, and killing around 300 Hezbollah military operatives and attacking. Half of the attacks were in South Lebanon, south to the Litani River, in the UN area of operation. This is a little bit with statistics, and I think this exemplifies two things. First, that the Lebanese government is far from doing enough with regard to disarming Hezbollah south to the Litani River and anywhere in Lebanon. And second, that IDF is making sure that Hezbollah's efforts to recover will not be effective. Now, if it's kind of a competition between the efforts of Hezbollah to recover and the IDF activity against it, if we will understand that the activity of the IDF is not enough as well, then we will have to extend it. And I am not sure this extension will be exactly by boots on the ground, or just a airstrike, or just this, or just that. Maybe we cannot even imagine how exactly it would look like. But I believe that Israel will not enable Hezbollah, as time goes by, to win in this competition and to be capable of recovering. At the same time, I must say that looking at the expressions that are coming out from all players in the past 2 weeks, my feeling is that Lebanese and Americans are actually telling Israel, please continue. Please extend your attacks. Please do something against Hezbollah, because we are not going to do that. And I think that Lebanese have to understand that if
Wait,
Israel
Sarit, can I just press you on one point? Obviously, yes, I think that's you could see that from the U.S. Why do you say that Lebanese officials? Because publicly they are condemning Israel's strikes.
Because many people in Lebanon understand that if Hezbollah will recover, there is no prospect for the state of Lebanon, and it will continue to be a failed state, and no money will get in for the recovery of the state of Lebanon. They are afraid from a civil war, so they are afraid to do it by themselves. So Israel is a very convenient solution in this respect. I think that before rushing into a ground operation and all those suggestions that I hear in the media in the past few days, we should bring the Lebanese to a situation that they claim responsibility to their own country. And they understand that Israel will defend itself, but they need to rebuild their own country and they need to fight Hezbollah. We are not concerned about the future of Lebanon. This is the mission of the Lebanese. We are concerned on our security and we will do whatever needed. And it has to be stopped, this kind of play that you exactly described, that they will blame us for destroying areas of Lebanon, but at the same time, they are afraid to do what is needed by themselves. This game should end. And I think the sooner the better. For now, it looks like the Lebanese are playing the old games of 2006. And the only one that will lose from that will be the Lebanese themselves.
All right. Well, Yosef, you can weigh in on any of these issues, as we're saying, but I also do want to go back a little bit to Gaza situation. And as I reported, there is this report of this resolution that's going to be brought to the UN Security Council, basically giving, I guess, UN approval. There are a Security Council approval on this ISF. Reportedly, this was at the insistence of some of the countries that want to take part in it. But I wonder if there are some red flags for Israel here. One, that's simply the involvement of the UN and it going to the Security Council, which has been problematic for Israel. Some of the vagueness and question of the responsibility, bringing it back to the issue of Hezbollah, who's going to be responsible for disarming Hamas? And again, the inclusion of, this is a draft resolution, it may change, inclusion of the Palestinian Authority eventually having some role after undergoing some reforms that seem a little vague at this point.
Well, vagueness is the name of the game here. This ambiguity is deeply embedded in the Trump plan. Trump plan is a bunch of principles that when you go to the field and you try to translate them into reality, it's very difficult. As is the case with what we spoke about before, the Rafah terrorists. And here too, there's a big question mark, because it's not clear from the plan who's actually going to be carrying out the move of disarming Hamas. If they're going to willfully lay down their arms, of course, everybody's going to be happy. But if not, is the ISF actually going to force Hamas to disarm? This is just supposed to overlook and make sure that the disarmament is taking place, but they're not going to fight for the disarmament of Hamas, and I don't think anybody is going to do that part of Israel itself. So it's a big question mark. But the proposal brought forward by the Americans to the Security Council is, I'm sure, coordinated with Israel, and it's fine. Israel has a say regarding the participants in the International Stabilization Force. It has to approve them. Israel has a say regarding the question of whether the Palestinian Authority has gone through enough satisfactory reforms and so on and so forth. So we have a hand on the wheel. Of course, there are many other hands, and especially very strong American hands on the wheel. But Israel also has a couple of fingers there. So it's something that we can live with. But eventually, I think what's interesting in both cases is look where we are. What we are talking about is the disarmament of Hamas and Hezbollah. That's what we're talking about. We reached the point where this is the issue. That's wonderful. That's a very impressive progress that we've done through the 2 years of fighting. And yes, of course, this is the decisive moment for both Hamas and Hezbollah. Being disarmed is something unthinkable. They don't want to do that and don't want to make it happen. But they understand that they're under a lot of pressure. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, in each case, what are the elements that would make the pressure successful? There's no guarantee, but first of all, in the case of Hamas, still hovering, and Trump mentions it again and again, hovering over them is the possibility that Israel will resume the military operations and will kill them all. That's the way Trump refers to that. And I think this is very important because this is the main tool we have. On top of that, we have the tool of reconstruction. There's not going to be any reconstruction and maybe not even humanitarian aid coming to the areas under Hamas control if they do not show readiness to disarm. And there's growing pressure from the Palestinians living in Gaza over Hamas to disarm because they want to see this reconstruction begins. And that's a very important tool that we have. Another tool that we have is the Article 17 of the Trump plan that says that we can start reconstruction and improving the living of the conditions of the Palestinians in the areas under our control. So we can separate Gaza into two kinds of territories, one that is under Israeli control where life is wonderful, and one under Palestinian control and Hamas control where life is miserable. And this will put more pressure on Hamas. We should use all of those tools in order to move forward. And when it comes to Hezbollah, as Sarit mentioned, we have to continue doing what we are doing, and even in a harsher way, to deliver the message. There's a price, and we are here too, joined by the Americans. There was a time, a very short period of time, when the Americans went out of the order. They were saying, just because the Lebanese government has said something nice about the need to disarm Hezbollah and endorsed a certain plan by the military without doing anything, that already justifies some gestures by Israel, and like, for example, moving away from the 5 points that we still keep inside Lebanon.
Right. Well, I do want to actually raise... Right, I want to just raise with Sarit because Yossi linking the fact of Israel achieving, at least in principle, the disarming of Hamas and Hezbollah. But there are some differences, and there's one big difference. The patron countries of Hamas, Qatar and Turkey, have basically agreed with that principle of disarming, whereas the patron country of Hezbollah, Iran, not only doesn't agree, but is actively involved in trying to rearm it. So can that process move forward at all without some bigger strategy by the U.S., including certainly maybe primarily the U.S., putting pressure on Iran?
Look, the assessments in Alma Center are not optimistic. We think that there is a lot of work to be done. You mentioned the Iranians. The involvement of Iran in Hezbollah is deeper than it used to be. And it is clear that as long as in Tehran we have the Islamic Republic, it will be very difficult to create a change. Inside the Lebanese armed forces, there are still officers that are collaborating with Hezbollah. We know their names, they were published, and some things needs to be done. But at the same time, even though we are not optimistic, I think that's the time. That's the only timing, or the best timing, to actually do it. And that's why we should give it a chance. Even if the chances are not high, they are higher than they ever used to be. Another point I want to make, following what General Kuperwasser said about Gaza, is that in both cases, it's not the UN anymore that is responsible for the future of those areas, disarmament, peacekeeping forces and all of that. Now it's countries that are completely committed to the mission. It's specific countries. You have a specific address. And this is, I think, a lesson that was learned from the bad experience with UNIFIL. And I'm very happy that this is the case, because it gives me a little bit of hope that when maybe one out of the two will succeed, or at least will give us, again, a different kind of reality that will not enable those monsters to grow again.
Right. And I think I'll just conclude by noting you both really make the case that the U.S. is the address now, as opposed to something like the UN. And really, it is up to the will of the Trump administration that will help. And let's see how far this goes while Israel maintains its own right of self-defense. General Kuperwasser, Sarit, Zehavi, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you.
We do have some breaking news reports out of the U.S. that former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney has died of a cardiac-related illness at the age of 84. Of course, Dick Cheney, former Secretary of Defense and former Vice President under George W. Bush, a strong supporter of Israel historically, and one of, if maybe not the key architect of the second Iran war that overthrew Saddam Hussein. Dick Cheney passes away at 84. And keeping the focus on the U.S., in New York City, it's election day to choose a new mayor, and still leading in the polls is the Democratic State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, whose views on Israel have been the most controversial issue in the race. Now, Mamdani has challenged the legitimacy of Israel as the Jewish state. He's been a vocal supporter of BDS, the movement to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. And he has said as mayor he would order the arrest of Prime Minister Netanyahu if he stepped foot in New York, in line with the ICC ruling charging him with war crimes. Now, the latest polls show Mamdani is still leading his closest challenger, the former Democratic governor Andrew Cuomo, now running as an independent candidate. And that gap is between 5 to 10 percentage points. Here's what Governor Cuomo had to say about Mamdani in their last debate.
The Assemblyman will not denounce Hamas. The Assemblyman will not denounce Hassan Piker, who said America deserved 9/11. The Assemblyman just said in his response, well, it depends on occupation. That is code, meaning that Israel does not have a right to exist as a Jewish state, which he has never acknowledged. That is from the river to the sea.
Actually, the Mamdani has even voiced opposition to Israel as the Jewish state. Now, although some surveys have shown the race tightening this past week, Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa trails far behind in all polls, both Cuomo and Mamdani, and that led President Trump yesterday to suddenly announce his support for Cuomo. Trump wrote on his Truth Social platform, quote, "We must remember this. A vote for Curtis Sliwa is a vote for Mamdani. Whether you personally like Andrew or Cuomo or not, you really have no choice. You must vote for him and hope he does a fantastic job. He is capable of it. Mamdani is not." And Trump also threatened to cut federal funding for New York if Mamdani wins, saying, "If communist candidate Zohran Mamdani wins the election for mayor of New York City, is highly unlikely I will be contributing federal funds other than the very minimum as required to my beloved first home, because of the fact that as a communist, this once great city has zero chances of success or even survival." And joining us now for more is Ruthie Blum. She's a senior editor at JNS, the Jewish News Service, and like me, counts New York as her first home. Born and bred in New Yorker, still a proud New Yorker, Ruthie?
Not really, but I guess you could say that being in Israel nearly 5 decades would kind of take care of that. I am a proud Tel Aviv resident, but it does break my heart to see what's happened to New York. It does. It was the most important city in the world, and now it looks like it's reverting to its disgusting state, the disgusting state it was in the 70s.
All right. Well, I lived in New York in the 70s. I didn't mind it. I didn't think it was as bad. But let me just ask you, New York City, for those who don't know, is home to some 1.3 million Jews. It's actually the city with the largest single Jewish population, even more than Tel Aviv, not the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, but the city of Tel Aviv. How do you count that Zohran Mamdani, who has made no secret of his view? He's been charged with anti-Semitism, which he's denied, but he certainly doesn't make any secret of his views about Israel. The fact that he is, at this stage, set to become the next mayor of New York.
Well, it's like this. First of all, we don't know. 40% of Jews are voting for New York Jews, New York City Jews, I mean. We don't know that number is accurate, but also it raises the question of who's a Jew in this context. And I have to say, you and I both know that American Jews, the definition can be very loose about who's a Jew. That's number one. Number two, the demography of New York has changed a lot. And there's a lot of, for example, young people. Now, I don't know if they're Jews or not Jews, but young people, educated people, I don't know, their education is dubious, let's put it that way. However, educated young people who feel that they can't afford their life in New York, even if they work there. We saw that, by the way, in protests in Tel Aviv as well. And they buy into Mamdani's assurance that buses will be free and rents will be frozen and grocery stores will be subsidized and it's very tempting to them. So much so that they don't seem to care what his views are on Jews in Israel, and their logic is, well, that's foreign policy. That doesn't matter for New York City. I disagree with that, of course, but I think that's what they're telling themselves.
Right. Though I have to say, I mean, we should note, for example, if his views on Israel count in New York, there's been talk that he may try to cancel the partnership between the Cornell University and the Haifa Technion that has established a college on Roosevelt Island. There are some New York pension funds that invest in Israel. Of course, there's his threat to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu if he should step foot in New York City. So there are ways, of course he would likely not have the authority to do that, but there certainly are ways in which New York City, just as even as a city, interacts with Israel significantly.
Absolutely. And by the way, speaking of his anti-Israel views, he also is anti-police, though he's trying now to cover his tracks on that in that respect. He's anti-police, and one of the ways he's now talking about that is that somehow the IDF has, trained the New York City police. And I think that's what's most worrisome for New Yorkers, even if you leave off the anti-Semitism, is that crime is rampant. And if he defangs the police, even more than it is defanged, because, today you say the police say even when they arrest criminals, they're let go. And that'll just get worse. But his way of tackling that is to say, no, it's not that he hates the police, it's that he hates the IDF. So,
Right.
He's a tricky guy, and his rhetoric is tricky. And something, if 40% of Jewish New Yorkers are voting for him, what we know is if he were a good Democratic candidate, you'd have a higher percentage of Jews voting.
Well, let's talk about a candidate that had the good Democratic candidate, as you would phrase it, probably in this race would be Andrew Cuomo. What do you make of President Trump suddenly supporting him? And those remember in Trump's first terms, the clashes he had with Cuomo on various issues, including, for example, COVID policy.
Right. Well, he hates Cuomo, but what he's now is doing is saying, look, I might like Curtis Sliwa, but since he has no chance, we've got to block Mamdani. We've got to vote for Cuomo. That's what Trump is up to. And by the way, many of Curtis Sliwa's friends in high places have said the same thing. We can see it all over social media, urging Curtis, saying, we love you, Curtis, and you're great, but you're losing. And what you're doing is taking votes away. You're splitting the vote, and you're making it hard to block Mamdani. I'll tell you, if I were in New York now, I would have a dilemma, because I would want to vote for Curtis Sliwa. And the attitude that for months now, well, since he has no chance, don't vote for him. I don't like that attitude, because obviously he'll certainly have no chance if nobody votes for him, including Republicans or people who like him, not just because he's a Republican, but because he's the safety guy. He's, the head of the Guardian Angels. He's a well-liked figure in New York City. And by the way, of the three candidates, he's the one who knows every inch of New York City. He really does. He knows all the subways. He knows every neighborhood, every borough, like the back of his hand. So it's a shame that he's the one who gets the short end of the stick here.
Right. I have 30 seconds, Ruthie. A word about Dick Cheney, who just passed away?
Yes, well, I think it's really sad because, in these days, the age 84 is actually young. As someone who has a 96-year-old father, I can say that. I think it's a shame. And I think Dick Cheney has gotten, a bad, let's say, a bad rap from some of the right wing of the right wing base or extreme base of the Republican Party. They've vilified him over the years.
Well, we'll have to wrap it at that. Ruthie Blum of JNS, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Kalev.
And that's a wrap for this edition of ILTV. Stay with us throughout the day, or you continue to watch on our app. There's our QR code on the screen there. Thanks. Keep watching on ILTV. I'm Kalev Ben David.